You're listening to Conversations with Purple. I'm your host, Purple. Thank you very much for tuning in. Yes, I know it's been quite a while since I made a podcast. I've been very busy with my radio show, Flashback 80s with Purple, but I decided I just had to come back to talk about a very significant date that just recently passed for all lovers of 80s music, and that's the launch of MTV on August 1st, 1981. So very hard to believe 40 years have passed, because let me tell you, it seems like it was just yesterday. I was actually fortunate enough to witness the launch of MTV. I remember being glued to the edge of my seat, fixated on the countdown on the screen. I didn't know what to expect, but I was very, very excited. After the countdown, a rocket launch flashed on the screen, followed by a voice saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, rock and roll." I knew right then and there this was going to be something special and something big. I ended up becoming immediately hooked, and MTV became a big part of my life. I would put MTV on as soon as I came home from school, and it would be on most nights until around bedtime. Weekends, of course, I had it on around the clock. It was on like 24/7. I always had a passion for music growing up, and MTV just seemed to deepen that passion. It just brought a sense of newness and excitement to the music scene, which had been lacking at the time. Record companies and radio stations back in the early 80s seemed to be really unsure of their direction. Disco had been dying since the end of the 70s, and arena rock was waning in popularity in the early 80s. So then along came MTV. Now, the established acts were kind of reluctant to make music videos. They really didn't understand the popularity, and they doubted that it would have any impact on the career. And at the same time, the record companies were very unwilling to give free music videos to this little network that they didn't think was going to go anywhere. So as a result of this, the early days of MTV relied a lot on videos from UK acts. So the network then became a showcase for a lot of early new wave and metal bands. This allowed me to become introduced to so many amazing 80s artists that I would have never heard of otherwise, due to the lack of them just not getting airplay on the radio. The power of MTV grew, and then bands were obliged to make music videos in order to sell records and remain relevant in the music scene. And as the network continued to expand its global reach, that's when we started to see these videos being made by artists with very limited talent. They were more packaging themselves for their sleek look. And then that's when MTV started to become less about the music and more about selling an image. Around that time, that's when the 90s were rolling in. Then MTV started dabbling with reality TV when they launched The Real World. This was the beginning of the end of MTV. The network then slowly began to abandon most of their music programming in favor of reality television. It's really sad to see such a powerful force in the music industry become such a shadow of its former self. But I really have to say, if it weren't for MTV, I don't think the 80s would have had such a big impact on the music scene, because so many of the great bands would have just been totally overlooked and remain undiscovered on a wider scale. So despite the drawbacks, I have to say I'm grateful to have been around for MTV's heyday, and I really hope that one day it can return to its former glory. But it will never ever again reach the heights that it did during its heyday of the 80s. The most amazing time for music. I know MTV can never repeat what it did in the 80s. It was an amazing time for music, and MTV provided us a window into the world of great music. Thank you, MTV, for introducing me to such great music. And to hear more great music, check out my radio show, Flashback 80s with Purple. Also, be sure to check out my website for my radio show, flashback80swithpurple.com, and my website for my podcast, conversationswithpurple.com. I'm hoping to bring you more content on a more regular basis. So thanks once again for tuning in to Conversations with Purple, a Purple Power production. Have a great week, and I'll catch you on the flip side.
The preceding program was a Purple Power production. All rights reserved.